Good morning and welcome to Unsafe Space, to the Daily Covfefe Show with Carter and Keri. Today is Tuesday, September 17th, and we're happy that you're joining us. We have a lot to talk about, and we're going to try to get it done in a concise episode today, although I'm really worked up about a few things. And as I told Carter, I joined a pyramid scheme last night, and I'm at the top of a small pyramid now of one person.
Keri, this is going to sound, I don't really care what it sounds like. It's going to sound misogynistic and 1940s or whatever, but your future husband, you need to give him all of your income and you get an allowance.
Look,
look,
Carter,
your pyramid scheme dabbling, it's got disaster written all over it.
But just allow me to tell you about these exciting new products.
I will not allow you to tell me about your exciting new products, Keri.
I just went there.
Go ahead.
Anyway, we can move on.
Let's move on.
We have important stuff to talk about.
Your reputation will suffer if we continue to have this conversation. So let's move on.
Oh gosh. Okay. Schools.
You're worked up about something, which is my favorite state for you to be in. So
well, I feel like we're probably going to continue to come back to this school issue quite a bit. We've tackled the New York City school stuff that's going on at least twice on Deprogrammed. And I think we've talked about it another time on Covfefe, but it's just, this is something that's amping up. My old ideology has moved out of colleges. We know this. Back when I was indoctrinated at Duke in the year 2000. Does anybody remember that Conan O'Brien sketch? Anyway, I was indoctrinated like 96 to 2000, 97 to 2000. And back then, I think you didn't see it in the public. You didn't see it in elementary schools and middle schools like you do today. And so it's continuing to move into the curriculum, and it's continuing to trickle downwards so that it's now in kindergarten. And for people who think that this is just New York and California, one of the articles we're going to talk about kind of touches on other states that this is moving into. So I saw a friend of mine, Steven, shared a couple of these articles with me at the same time, and they're all talking, it's all part of the same thing. And
yeah. So, I mean, the main article that you shared with me, Keri, I actually didn't have time to read the one you just shared a little while ago, but the main one you shared is this one in the Atlantic. Mm-hmm. When the culture war comes for the kids. And I don't know that it's worth walking through this entire article. It is long. It is rambling. I don't know if I think this is kind of typical for the Atlantic. It's like, it's a slog to get through because you just feel like, get to the point and shut the hell up, person writing. But
it's very worth it once you get down into like part 3 or 4.
It is, although I would like to say something. I started out reading this. I didn't like this guy. So this article is just at a high level. This is about a parent, and he's telling the saga of his child's journey through preschool all the way through middle school in the New York City school system, and he and his wife as parents trying to navigate that and do what's best for their child and blah, blah, blah. I didn't like this guy basically from paragraph 1. His first sentence is, to be a parent is to be compromised. I disagree with that. No, not if you have good values. It's not. You pledge an allegiance to justice for all when you swear the private attachments can rhyme with public good. But when the choice comes down to your child or an abstraction, even the well-being of children you don't know, you'll betray your principles to the fierce unfairness of love. Love isn't unfair. You don't have to betray your principles to be a parent. You're just wrong. This person's premises are just wrong.
Here's what I like about it, though.
Huh?
Let me interject. There are lots of things about this guy I didn't like either, but I think that's good because if someone like this, who's heavily entrenched in this ideology, has found problems with it and is suddenly coming, this is to me more evidence of a backlash brewing, perhaps.
Yes, I agree. He is the stereotypical white progressive Trump derangement syndrome, like literally Trump derangement syndrome liberal, who is looking at this going, wait a minute, I don't like the new social justice ideology of the left. And he talks about how it's taken over various schools and blah, 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 and some of the things they do, and how it's detrimental to kids, and how it's detrimental to marginalized kids in particular. And that's all fine. I guess I know this probably isn't the direction you want to take the conversation, but I want to touch on it at least for a minute, Keri, because I care about these kids. I care about this issue. This is killing children. It's destroying their futures. It's a horrible, like, I care about this. I also care that we don't let liberals get away with this. He is acting like a lot of liberals, like, oh, you guys just took it too far. This isn't where we wanted to go. It's like it went too far somehow. There's somehow these cultural Marxists, these identitarians, this intersectionality is not what we've been putting forward. It's not liberal, and it's not classical liberal, but classical liberal is like 100 years old. It is modern liberal. It's the liberal that I've known my entire life, and I'm 45. Liberals accepted premises which are false. They built their belief system on false premises, and the only thing the social justice people do is implement them more consistently. That's all that this is. And I don't think we should let liberals get away with saying, oh, we didn't have a part of this. This is some outside thing that's come in. No, you built the foundations for this. When you use words like equality without understanding what they mean, he has this whole dichotomy of like democracy versus meritocracy. Those things aren't opposites. He doesn't use democracy in any meaningful way. He doesn't even seem to understand what it means. He mislabels things. He holds these ideas as floating abstractions without very concrete understanding of what they mean, and banties them about because they sound virtuous without really understanding what they are. And he's laid the foundation for this. He is culpable for the thing that he is railing against. And all liberals are culpable for this. And I'm not like, this isn't like go to hell liberals. This is like, you guys got to wake up and understand that these ideas are an extension of what you have been pushing. They're not new.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a rant, but it pisses me off.
Well, here's one thing I'm going to say. Yes, I agree. I do lay this at the feet of liberals like myself, because at least in my case, I was part of the ideology. I thought it was liberalism. I was wrapped up in it. But I will say this. You said, he doesn't get to say, or he's acting as if they took it too far. Well, he addresses that point on right here, and I actually like this paragraph. He says, I asked myself if I was moving to the wrong side of a great moral cause because its tone was too loud, or because it shook loose what I didn't want to give up. It took me a long time to see that the new progressivism didn't just carry my own politics further than I liked. It was actually hostile to principles without which I don't believe democracy can survive. Liberals are always slow to realize that there can be friendly, idealistic people who have little use for liberal values. Let me say something about this before you interject. Yeah. This to me is exactly why this is so insidious, is because liberals like myself and like a lot of well-intentioned people who have gotten pulled into this crap and are preaching it and are standing by while their kids are being indoctrinated, they are slow to realize there can be friendly, idealistic people who have little use for liberal values. Yes, and they're also slow to realize that something can have a good name and sound good and have good and sound like it's built with good intent and be insidious and evil.
Yes, I would say so. I think this is an opportunity for liberals, and I know you considered yourself a liberal. You may still consider yourself a liberal. It's an opportunity for liberals to question why. So I disagree with that sentence. He said the new progressivism isn't just my stuff taken too far. Yes, it is your stuff taken too far. He doesn't get it. It is his values taken too far. That's what it is. It's just an opportunity for liberals to step back and question the foundations that they built things on. I'll throw out two obvious ones that one of them he uses a lot. Equality. Equality does not exist. When we used to use the word equality as a nation a long time ago, it was in relation to equality before the law. Equality does not exist in any other context. Even getting equality before the law is quite difficult and a noble pursuit of a country. But equality as such doesn't exist. And to hold that up as a virtue and something to be achieved is what leads to social justice. It's one of the paths. This idea that profit is dirty and bad and evil, that's from the left. Those are liberals. Those have been, as far as I've been alive, that's been the attitude of the liberals towards profit. Because they've always hated profit. They view it as a dirty, necessary evil at best, and at worst, something to be eradicated. Those are bad ideas that leads to this Marxism. All that happened was that these ideas that liberals pushed for,
do you think that, okay, so I see a difference between equality of opportunity, which I think we should strive towards.
There's no such thing as equality of opportunity.
Equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. No, but there is, but you can strive to make things, I understand what you're saying. We're never going to have equal opportunity. And obviously, individuals are different. Every individual circumstance is different. When I say equality of opportunity, I mean, and I'll define it because people should define terms so they know what's on the same page. I mean, removing legal obstacles, discriminatory legal obstacles that make it harder, that limit the opportunity for people on the basis of immutable identity characteristics.
Kind of, but you can't.
So like desegregating schools, for example, that was something we needed to do.
Well, what we needed to do was get rid of public schools altogether, because when you have the government running schools, you're going to end up with questions about, well, are you discriminating against poor people? Is it this? Is it that? But like the free market handles this. But this idea of, I think embracing the idea of public education, and this is this other thing that really bothers me about this guy and his wife. At the very beginning, they're neurotic to the point of disease. At the beginning, I was like, whoa, you're freaking out about your 2-year-old in a way that, like, as a parent of a 10-year-old, I'm like, I could not relate to the freak out and neuroticism they had over schools. And it's like,
do you think that's
just
a function
caught up in your own in a like,
is that
really
a function of being in New York? Is that a New York thing though? Because he seemed to paint it as like, this is a New York thing.
Maybe, but I think it's also an attitude thing. I mean, I know people like that in the Bay Area, but you know, he got caught up in the wrong rat race and blamed it on meritocracy as a thing, but he's in the wrong, he's focusing on the wrong values of a meritocratic system. So it's this odd thing where liberals, you know, they eschew profit, but boy, are they really concerned only about material wealth as the measure of success. And like, that's where his mindset for his kids seemed to be like, will he get into this school and go this and do that? Like, my mindset as a parent was, will my daughter be happy? What will make her happy and fulfilled? What does she need as an individual to make her life happy and fulfilled? That was basically it.
I disagree, because as he summed it up the way his daughter said at some point, he's thinking about, is she going to get a good education? Are they going to get a good education? Because if they fail, like his daughter's anxiety at some point, if I fail at this test, then I fail at middle school. If I fail at middle school, then I fail at high school. If I fail at high school, then I fail at college. And if I fail at college, then I fail at life. Now, I think that's wrong, but I understand that
that's neurotic is what it is.
Right. But look at the outcome. He doesn't want, let's back up for a second. This article, for people, we should have done this at the beginning, but let's just do it now. This guy is named George Packer. This is in the October 2019 issue of The Atlantic. It's called When the Culture Ware Comes for the Kids.
We did do this.
Oh, we did? Sorry.
We pulled it up and we talked through it.
Right, but
I read the first paragraph.
I know, but we didn't name the guy or anything. I'm just titling it. I'm telling you it's by George Packer. You can look it up. Let's just go through it a little bit. I know we read the first paragraph. I'm going to skip past some of the neuroses that you're talking about.
Well, do you, I guess I just want to know where we don't have to argue about it now. I want to know where you stand. Do you think that he's right that this social justice thing is a different beast, or do you think that it's just liberalism, like more newer liberalism carried to its logical extension? Because I think it's the latter.
I don't. I disagree. But maybe that's because I was in it and I can see where he's coming from. And also, if anybody's going to have a chance of breaking through to people, liberals who are still caught up in this and who've been bullied and manipulated and brainwashed into thinking that this is good. You're going to have to start talking. You're going to have to talk to them where they're at, and you're not talking to them where they're at. I'm not saying that you're wrong.
No, my goal is not to I'm not talking to them right now. I'm talking to you.
Right. But yeah, and I'm saying I agree with him more than I do you.
Okay. So you think that this social justice stuff is some sort of came out of left field and is not related to liberalism?
I do, because it used to be I didn't, the Martin Luther King speech, like, I dream of a world where my children are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That used to be the ideal. It used to be about individualism.
Well, not really, though. Liberalism was always about equality and class struggle, right? Liberalism was always about, liberals instituted quotas, like liberals instituted affirmative action.
Which I totally disagree with. I totally disagree with.
Okay, then you weren't a typical liberal, but that's the typical liberal.
At the time I agreed with it, but I don't think that is liberalism. My point is, it was.
So you're rewinding liberalism back to a super old definition of liberalism.
Yeah, okay, then yes. But my point is, there are certain legal, I believe in equality of opportunity if what that means is removing legal hurdles that are on the basis of race and gender, which necessarily means that I don't believe in putting in new hurdles on the basis of race and gender. Like,
what's an example of a legal hurdle that you were talking about?
Well, the schools used to be segregated. Like, when my mom went through desegregation, she was at a white school and they had black schools, and the black kids couldn't go to the white schools, and that's like a legal hurdle. That's something in the law that needs to be changed.
Okay, so you're saying government-run institutions should not discriminate based on those things.
Right.
Okay, but that's not going to achieve your equality, because all the left, I'll demonstrate what the social justice warriors did. All they did was look at basic stats, which they normally avoid facts if they're not in their favor, but this fact is in their favor. They looked at some basic stats and they said, well, wealth is correlated to color of your skin. Therefore, this is not equal opportunity. Like you've been telling us, Keri, we need equal opportunity. It's not equal opportunity. There is a barrier, and they're just implementing the barrier in a different way. They're doing it by discriminating against poor kids, which is racist. It's a racist way to discriminate against black kids. So that's why those laws are also barriers based on color of your skin, and we have to fix
this is where I would say this is a different beast, because now you're not talking about legal barriers. That's why I always ask people when they talk to me about, like, oh, institutionalized sexism or institutionalized racism. And I'm like, can you name, what law is it that you want to change? And they can't name one, because so you think it's the government's job to fix a societal problem. Let's say, I don't even agree that the problem necessarily exists in the way that you think it does, but let's say it does, for the sake of argument. It's not the government's job to then to socially engineer things in such a way.
Well, but when you have the principle that it's the government's job to make sure there's equal opportunity, right? It's not the government's job to make sure there's equal opportunity. That's the fallacy. Once you think it's the government's job to make sure there's equal opportunity, it's a small step from saying we should have school desegregation, which is fine, to, well, we kind of de facto have segregation, which is what de Blasio is saying in New York City. We have de facto segregation because of these economic things, and this is an example of something that's not equal opportunity. And they're right. It isn't an equal opportunity. It isn't. That's not equal opportunity.
No, but we have to redefine then that's why I defined what equality. I feel like we're getting in the weeds and we're not going to get to talk about this.
No, I think we're getting to something really important, because
okay.
You've defined equal opportunity to be more narrow than the definition that is generally accepted.
Well, I'm defining what it should be. My point is, this progressivism is defining it incorrectly. Okay. We had to take a break because I got really upset with Carter. And so did my dog. Yeah, listen to Jack. He's still pissed off. Look, my whole point is I don't know what we're arguing about anymore. I really don't. And I don't have time to figure it out on this daily covfefe, which is supposed to be lighthearted. And we're supposed to get through things, even if serious things, in a concise manner. And whatever the point is that you're trying to make, I'm not getting it, much less anybody who's on the left, who's caught up in this SJW stuff. they're not going to get it. You're not meeting them where they're at. That's my point. You're not meeting them where they're at. And so I fully get that. Look, I make a distinction between liberal and SJW, and I would love to do a video on that sometime. It's very important to me, the distinction. And I have to create a space, or I want to create a space where liberals feel safe to be like, I am still a liberal. I am rejecting SJWism. And what I feel like you're asking people to do is just reject all of the left. And I think that's impossible and short-sighted, and you're never going to get people to do that. And so that's my point. And I get why some people do. There are people who I talk to all the time who don't draw that distinction, and they just call it leftism. Fine, but I don't do that.
No, I think that you're making a good point. I do think that liberals should question their premises, but you're right. That's probably not the best way to approach them on this topic, or any topic for that matter. I want to clarify. I do see a distinction between the social justice left and the liberals. There is a distinction, and further than that, actually, Keri, one thing I'm learning from this conversation, even the word liberal is really ill-defined, because some people mean it in a very classical liberal sense. Some people mean it, when I think of liberal, I think of Bernie Sanders liberal, which is not classical liberal.
He's not a liberal.
Well, even 4 years ago, Bernie Sanders, right? Or whatever, right? That's kind of what I think. But I think maybe the term liberal is also not super well defined. But I hear you. I don't think the best way to convince liberals is to come at them with hey, your premises have been wrong all along, and they led to this. I agree with that. And I do think there is a palpable difference between social justice and the more traditional liberalism, even if I think they're based on similar premises. So how would you approach them? What would you say? What would you say to these guys?
Well, I would get back to the article, because he's doing it. He's doing a great job of it. And I think it's a great piece, despite what minor problems I have with it. This is a guy who has been part of the SJW left, in my opinion. That's my characterization. And he's starting to see the difference between SJWism and liberalism. I just want to read some relevant parts of this, because this is a really great piece, and it's long, and people should, I know it's long, so let's just hit on some of the important parts. Mm-hmm. Who was driving the new progressivism? Young people, influencers on social media, leaders of cultural organizations, artists, journalists, educators, and more elected Democrats. You could almost believe they spoke for a majority, but you would be wrong. An extensive survey of American political opinion published last year by a nonprofit called More in Common found that a large majority of every group, including Black Americans, thought that, quote, political correctness, end quote, was a problem. The only exception was a group identified as, quote, progressive activists, end quote. Just 8% of the population, and likely to be white, well-educated, and wealthy. Other polls found that white progressives were readier to embrace diversity and immigration and to blame racism for the problems of minority groups. So they're more likely to do that than Black Americans are. The new progressivism was a limited, mainly elite phenomenon. And this is something I've seen before, and I think is important to point out, is all of this wokeness is an elite phenomenon. It is a white, upper class elite phenomenon, predominantly.
Yep. We've talked about this before.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you see it. That's why you see kids at Yale screaming and crying about how oppressed they are, which is the most ridiculous, just ridiculous and disgusting concept to me. But that point, I think, is a great one. And then later he talks about how, so this new progressivism, and I think he also is right when he talks about within the past 5 years, something changed. And he highlights a few cultural touch points, he highlights the Ferguson stuff, and he just makes brief reference to a couple things. Kaepernick taking a knee, the Me Too stuff, and Ferguson, and how this started to creep into culture and into the schools. So from his perspective, this is a guy who didn't start to notice this, and maybe never would have noticed it, maybe just would have gone along with the crowd, except that it started to affect his kids' education. And so suddenly, let's see, he talks about how it started with the school his kids were at, like they started to say they shouldn't take standardized tests, that standardized tests are racist and oppressive or whatever. And there was this push and orthodoxy, as he called it, for the parents to opt out, to make sure their kids didn't take the standardized tests. And he noticed that as this movement progressed, it wasn't just a question of whether or not you want to do this and let us give you the information on it. It was, they were being coerced. The parents were being coerced, and it was like a mob. It was a tribalist thing. And so in the end, something like 95% of the parents said their kids were not going to take the standardized tests.
Right.
And
he described that room, that situation, that room where like the teachers weren't supposed to say anything, but they like held the meeting and relied on the vocal parents to put all the social pressure on the other parents to say, we're not taking the test either. Right. Our kids won't take the test.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he has this point where he talks about, here it is. So this is supposed to be helping, quote, marginalized kids, right? And this is an excellent point that you and I brought up before. It's not actually even helping the kids it's supposed to help. So I like this paragraph too. It says, something else about these opt-out movements the opt-out movement troubled me. Its advocates claimed that the test penalized poor and minority kids. I began to think that the real penalty might come from not taking them. Opting out had become so pervasive at our school that the Department of Education no longer had enough data to publish the kind of information that prospective applicants had once used to assess the school. In the category of student achievement, the department now gave our school no rating. No outsider could judge how well the school was educating children, including poor Black and Latino children. The school's approach left gaps in areas like timetables, long division, grammar, and spelling. Families with means filled these gaps. So if you have money, you can fill these gaps, right? As did some families whose means were limited. Marcus's parents enrolled him in after-school math tutoring. When a girl at our bus stop fell behind because she didn't attend school for weeks after the death of her grandmother, who had been the heart of the family, there was no objective measure to act as a flashing red light. In the name of equality, disadvantaged kids were likelier to falter and disappear behind a mist of togetherness and self-deception. Banishing tests seemed like a way to let everyone off the hook. This was the price of dismissing meritocracy. That's another great revelation that he had, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, it is. And it's, I mean, meritocracy is that's how you get class mobility, right? That's how class mobility works, through meritocracy. That's how it works. Unless you want to make everyone equally poor and dead, like, Soviet Union. Yeah.
Which is kind of what maybe they want to do. They don't care.
One thing that you're right. They probably do want to do that, Keri. You're right.
Some of them do, and some of them don't. Some of them, again, some people are well-intentioned, but there are some of them, it's like, well, we don't like the stats that say that Black and Latino kids are not achieving as high, so let's just get rid of the stats. Hey, guess what?
Right.
Well, Black and
let's
Latino
just get rid of
kids
achievement.
Yeah, Black and Latino kids aren't doing any better. You're just not measuring anything anymore.
Right. Everyone's doing worse. I don't know if this struck you about this article, but something that struck me about this article is an attitude that I think is shared by a lot of people, which is this idea that school is a place where you go, you send your child to basically be raised, not just educated. And actually, this guy's kid seems to question that. There's a part in here where the kid's like, aren't I supposed to be learning how to read and do math, not other stuff? There's some point where the kids make some comment like, isn't school for learning stuff?
Yeah, imagine that.
Right. But the parents actually, even this parent, the parents actually, because you could see it in their struggle for where should I send my child? They really viewed school as like, not this place to learn specific subjects, but a place to learn the morals and kind of foundations of who they would be as an adult, rather than, I think what used to be the case is parents used to feel like, those all come from home. You teach them reading, writing, and arithmetic. We'll teach them about community and tolerance and beliefs and what's right and wrong and blah, blah, blah. But more and more parents, and, you know, it seems like this is a dual income. They're, you know, both parents are working, trying to put their kid in preschool when the kid's 2. So it doesn't sound like there's a stay-at-home parent taking care of the child. So that's changed. That used to be common. But they're really turning to these schools to do more than just teach kids math or reading, but they're turning to these schools to teach them how to be human beings and
Right.
members of society. And
Moral
that is
education.
not what schools are for,
Yeah.
especially government schools.
Yeah, it's not for moral education. And by the way, and they're deciding which moral education it is, and it's this social justice morality.
Well, necessarily, right? If you're going to hand someone else your kids to teach them moral education, that person has control over what the definition of moral education is, right? And so that's going to happen. And you might agree with social justice, and you might say, great, they're teaching stuff that I love. Send them there. But they also have the ability to teach stuff that you don't love. It's really your responsibility as a parent to raise a moral individual, not the schools. And something that's really bothered me about this shift in attitudes of parents is a lot of parents view their children as accessories, or like just like a thing that they have, like the birth is the hard part, and then we ship them off to school and someone else raises them. And that's not what having a child is about. And you're creating, this is how NPCs get created, right?
Oh,
Even
yeah.
if you like look at the projects this kid did, it was all the poor kids. I mean, one of the kids cried when Trump was elected. Kids shouldn't give a crap. I don't remember giving a crap about who was the president when I was in like elementary school.
Well, I think that was another touching part of this piece to me too, is he talked about the effect of bringing politics and indoctrinating your children. He talked about the effect of it on his kids and how he and his wife made the decision to stop talking about politics with them and to stop like, and he even acknowledged, because you can see this guy's still, this is why I said earlier, he's struggling and he's still, you have to meet people where they're at. He's where I was when I maybe first started waking up to stuff. And so you can't just discard everything all at once. And so he's even grappling with the question of, well, is it my privilege that's allowing me to stop talking about politics? Because that's what they tell you. They brainwash you with that.
Right. It's similar to your back alley story of like, well, am I only worried about the guy who said who would F me up because of his race? Like, oh, is it my privilege that makes me?
Yeah, they make you question what is common sense and what is your gut. And I had someone tell me that once about, I can't remember what it was, but it was something similar. It's like if you choose not to view the world this way, and you choose not to indoctrinate your children and put little political slogans on them and use them as a way to validate your own narcissistic political beliefs and worldview, which is what that is. I think it's sick. I used to think it was so cute when I saw kids at protests, because I was at protests all the time, and I was a friggin' woke SJW, and now I look at that stuff and it's no different to me than the kids who go to the God Hates Fags protests. You're doing the same thing to your kid. You're doing the same friggin' thing, and you feel morally just about it, just like the Fred Phelps people do about doing it to their kids. But you're not. He comes to this realization in this piece. He's like, we should be teaching kids how to think, not what to think. Yes.
Yes. Although interestingly enough, something that I thought about was he noticed that they're being taught what to think at some point, but it seemed like he didn't notice that actually his child had been taught what to think all along. It was just part of it was what curriculum they focused on, and then it transitioned to overt like lessons. And when it switched to overt lessons, he noticed it and went, oh, wait a minute, you're teaching them what to think. But even prior to that, these poor kids, if you look at the one kid, his projects were all like, he's worried about endangered species and the environment and like this and that. Like it's burdening these kids. We're raising a generation of neurotic kids because we're telling them about these huge problems where we take all the crazy hysteria of these problems, we transmit to children, and children don't have the sense to sort through it. Like when AOC says, we have 14 months to save the planet. a lot of adults can look at that and go, yeah, it's hyperbole. Even if you agree with her generally, directionally, you can look at that and go, yeah, that's hyperbole. I understand. It's, I want to work on it, but it's not that catastrophic. But kids, they don't know how to do that. They actually think there's catastrophe. And these kids are, I think, going to grow up absolutely neurotic, that they're frightened that everything is falling apart and the world is coming to an end. And that's just not true. The things that they're teaching, they're indoctrinating partly just through what they focus on in curriculum, right? What they focus on. I don't think kids need to care who's the president of the United States. I don't think kids need to care really about the environment. And like, it's not a problem that a 10-year-old can solve. And it's a lot more complex than can be transmitted with the nuance it deserves to a 10-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And so it shouldn't be part of their zeitgeist, but it is.
Well, and like we've talked about before, there are parts of this ideology. It creates self-hatred in people, not just for their biological sex or their gender or their race, but for being a human.
What was the quote? There's a quote in here.
There's a quote in here. Yeah. So here, it's what you're talking about with the two kids. So this is after he talks about, the president won and they were all crying, the family, and, the wife took the daughter to the women's march, which I was shaking my head like, no, gosh, no, that's not what your kid needs. But anyway, so here, our son,
it's halfway down.
Yeah, halfway down. He had been painfully aware of climate change throughout elementary school. First grade was devoted to recycling and sustainability. And in third grade, during a unit on Africa, he learned that every wild animal he loved was facing extinction. Quote, "What are humans good for besides destroying the planet?" he asked. Our daughter wasn't immune to the heavy mood. She came home from school one day and expressed a wish not to be white so that she wouldn't have slavery on her conscience. It did not seem like a moral victory for our children to grow up hating their species and themselves. We decided to cut down on the political talk around them. And then this is
what I love about kids. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, just the part about where he addresses the question of whether or not it's his privilege that allows him to do that, which it's not. It's ridiculous. You have the privilege to do whatever SJW says that to you right here. Your privilege has spared them. No, it hasn't. You're being a stubborn, narcissistic ideologue if you force this stuff on your kids, and you want to pretend. You want to pretend like people who do the healthy adult thing are privileged. If they're privileged, their privilege is being sane, and their privilege is caring about their kids. Do you know? Like, it's not whatever you're pretending it is. That makes me so angry.
Yeah, and the thing that I love about kids is often they inadvertently just distill an attitude down to its bare naked essence in a way that grown-ups are afraid to do. So like his son just saying like, what's humanity good for anyway, but destroying the planet. That's the entire philosophy of large portions of people in the United States, but they don't say it that way, because saying it that way makes them sound bitter and malevolent and unproductive. So that's not how they say it. But that's how he rightly interpreted that as, that is the message. That's the theme. Great job identifying the theme, kid. That's it. And his daughter identified one of the central themes of social justice, which was like, I wish I wasn't white because then I wouldn't have racism on my shoulders. Like, sweetheart, you don't have racism. Like, you were not responsible for slavery. You were not responsible for it. But social justice has taught her that.
Yeah, and no race owns slavery. No individual, like, and even if it did, you're not defined by your race. But there's so many things wrong with that.
But it's an accurate sentiment that expresses the theme of what's being foisted on these kids.
Oh yes, right? And a lot of times you're right. The kids will distill what it's about, where the adults will be in denial. Because a lot of white adult SJWs, they pretend like it's not about white guilt, and but it totally is. They're walking around with this unearned guilt, group guilt, and they try to get you to share in it. And it's like, no, thank you. I don't have any part of that. Like, you can keep it.
Right.
So, so there's another great part here where he talks about this is another, I just feel like I'm reading, I know this is long, but I feel like I'm reading a guy who is waking up to some stuff. And that's what I liked about this piece, because I wrote my piece about waking up, and that it resonated with a lot of people. And it was a very different kind of piece, but it was about waking up. And this piece, I'm hoping, this is in the Atlantic. I'm like, maybe there are people who are going to read this and wake up a little bit to what he's saying, you know?
This question just a little bit of something.
Yeah,
right?
just question a little bit of something. So he starts talking about identity, because he correctly realizes that this new ideology is about identity. The battleground of the new progressivism is identity. And by the way, it's not progressivism, dude. Once you get far enough along in understanding what this is, you won't call it progressivism anymore, but it is identity. And he goes on about identity for a while. He talks about the bathroom debate and how the bathroom crisis and how it hit their school, and how, one student decided to start using male pronouns and going by the letter Q as a first name. And the school, instead of just creating a gender neutral bathroom for that student, decided to get rid of gendered bathrooms at all and made both bathrooms, it used to say boys only, girls only, made them both say students. And so boys and girls are now using the bathroom together. And they didn't think it was important enough to tell the parents that they were making this change. And so the way the parents found out were when kids were coming home, having to go to having bathroom emergencies because they had been holding it all day, and girls had boys banging open the doors to the bathroom stalls on them, and boys not wanting to use the urinal because girls are in there. Like awful stuff that's happening to these kids without the parents even being considered. Like,
Right.
hey, we're going to do this.
Right.
You know, and he's like, there was something heartbreaking about it because the adults couldn't figure it out, that the kids just sort of started going back to the bathrooms as the boys started using what had been the boys' bathroom, and the girls started using what had been the girls' bathroom. And it's like these kids had to figure this out for themselves because the adults are so friggin' crazy.
I actually love that part. I love the part where the adults are like, it's all gender neutral, and the kids are like, yeah, you know, it turns out we figured out what works. It's if boys go over here and girls go over there.
Yeah.
They figured it out.
Guess what, lunatic adults?
Right.
So then this is another part I wanted to read. Just bear with me. Again, there's some great parts here. Okay, so this is another kind of aha moment that he had, and he's correct about this. He goes, in politics, identity is an appeal to authority. This is exactly right. It's a fallacy. It's the fallacy of authority. It's an appeal to authority, the moral authority of the oppressed. I am what I am, which explains my view and makes it the truth. That's SJW ideology in a nutshell. The politics of identity starts out with the universal principles of equality, dignity, and freedom, but in practice, it becomes an end in itself, often a dead end, a trap from which there's no easy escape and maybe no desire for escape. Instead of equality, it sets up a new hierarchy that inverts the old discredited one, a new moral caste system that ranks people by the oppression of their group identity. This is everything we talk about on Deprogrammed.
He's figuring out the system.
He's figuring it out. Like, this is a guy, I like this article because you're watching a guy trying to articulate what he's discovering. It makes race, which is a dubious and sinister social construct, an essence that defines individuals regardless of agency or circumstance. As when Representative Ayanna Pressley said, and we've talked about this, Carter, quote, "We don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. We don't need black faces that don't want to be a black voice," which is one of the most racist things you could say.
By the way, you notice he's still got some weird beliefs, right? Race is a dubious and sinister social construct. No, it's not a social construct, right?
Yeah.
So he's still got some of these beliefs. He just doesn't. He's starting to realize that, like, he doesn't like where this is going.
Right. Well, it's like when you watched the very first interview that I did after I wrote my essay, and I was so nervous. I don't like public speaking, and I've always viewed podcasts as public speaking, and I've gotten much better at it and more comfortable with it, and I don't get as nervous beforehand as I used to. But the first one I did, I was like, I had to mentally prepare. I was so nervous. And I think I did okay, although I watch it now, it makes me cringe. I've only watched it the one time because I was like, oh.
Wait, which one are you talking about?
The one that you watched where I was on the Glazoff gang.
Oh, that one.
Jamie Glazoff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And you said I don't think you watched it until we had been doing the podcast for a while together. And then you said, hey, I found this interview of you and I watched it. And even since then, you've changed a lot, because in that interview, you were talking about how, of course, white privilege is real and stuff like that.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, you don't
Yeah.
shed it all at once.
That's fair. You don't. Yeah. And Keri, you were pointing out also, I didn't read these other articles, but you shared a few other articles. This isn't just happening. We know it happens in California. I think I mentioned the other day that California tried to, their website had some new curriculum thing they tried to push on people, saying that capitalism and white men were bad, or males, not white men. Capitalism and men were inherently oppressive somehow. They took it down off their site after there was some backlash. But this is a California thing and a New York thing, but you said it's elsewhere as well that people should pay attention to.
Well, there's this other piece, that I wanted to share. And this one, it's a great companion piece, as my friend Steven said. This is in Real Clear Investigations, and this one is called Woke History is Making Big Inroads in America's High Schools by John Murawski. And so just a couple things from here. Like growing numbers of public high school students across the country, many California kids are receiving classroom instruction in how race, class, gender, sexuality, and citizenship status are tools of oppression, power, and privilege. They are taught about colonialism, state violence, racism, intergenerational trauma, heteropatriarchy, and the common thread that links them, whiteness. Students are then graded on how well they apply these concepts in writing assignments, performances, and community organizing projects. And so all of this stuff here that they're talking about, this is stuff that I was indoctrinated with in college. I can't imagine if I had been indoctrinated with it in elementary school, how much harder it would have been. And maybe it wouldn't have been. Maybe I would have started to see through it, like some of these kids are starting to see through it. But
it might have become a joke, right? It might have been
right.
Like, the one thing I want to point out about this paragraph is it really, like, I know there was the other, I think, one sentence explanation of intersectionality that you said was a great one sentence description, and I agree it was. But another great one sentence description is basically just, and it's a racist description, it's just hatred of whiteness. That's basically how all of this is based on, hatred of whiteness. And all of these, colonialism, state violence, racism, intergenerational trauma, heteropatriarchy, like the common thread that they claim there is whiteness. And the truth is,
and maleness, hateness of maleness.
Yeah. And racism isn't uniquely white. The Arab slave trade was 20 times the North American slave trade, right? There were more whites that were slaves in North Africa than there were slaves in the US. But this is not stuff we talk about.
Right. And slavery's not over. There's still slavery in lots of parts of the world, but we don't talk about that either because it doesn't fit the narrative.
That's right. I think you could I heard the rumor that you can get a slave on the open market in Libya now for $400.
Oh yeah.
Right? After destabilization of Libya. There's real slavery out there in the world, but we don't talk about it. We talk about a small percentage of the population of America 200 years ago or 150 years ago who owned slaves and blame all whites now on that.
Yeah.
That's their fault, right?
So he goes on to list a couple of examples of what's happening in California, right? And these are all things where you're turning kids into, this makes me think again of the lecture I heard from Professor Jonathan Haidt, who was talking about the two different ideas of what university is supposed to be. One being John Stuart Mill, or the idea is that you're searching for truth. The idea of university is knowledge and truth. Like that's the ideal. You should be there to learn, to attain knowledge, and in the pursuit of truth. But the other way of looking at the other ideal is this Marxist ideal, which is that the purpose of university is that you're there to be turned into a little activist, to be indoctrinated with the correct ideology and go out into the world and make the world a better place. And so you can either educate kids or you can turn them into activists. And
yeah.
The college is leaning this way forever. And now the elementary schools are doing it. And they get credit. Look at this one. They get credit, just like in one of the other articles we read where the college students were getting credit for going and then indoctrinating high school kids.
Yep.
There's an example here where the high school kids are getting credit for going and indoctrinating middle school kids.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Like, spread this to kids younger than you and you'll get credit for it.
Yep.
I'm sorry, I interrupt.
No, I mean, it was kind of a tangent, but it was, you know, this radical activist political ideology has really, really bad philosophy behind it, but it's the kind of philosophy that if you say out loud is so ridiculous that no one would believe that that's actual philosophy. Like, and so what they do is they, I would argue that they probably think that they, you know, your two forms of the university, like one's about pursuing truth and one's about activism. They would probably argue that, well, the truth leads you to have to do activism because it's art, and they would argue, I mean, they have some really messed up views on truth, like metaphysically and epistemologically, their views are really weird. So there is no truth, or my truth is different than your truth, or the only truth that matters is based on this. So they redefine these terms in a way that, to the outside observer, if all they did was speak on philosophical terms, you would dismiss them out of hand as stoned or high or whatever. You'd be like, you guys are crazy. But they don't. They use them, and very few intellectuals actually understand the philosophic basis of the political conclusions that they've drawn, and then they just foist the political conclusions on you. But if anyone really challenges and they want to get into deep, they can kind of justify it by using these bromides about how, well, truth is relative, and like, so you can't blame, we are looking for truth, right?
Right.
It's a sleight of hand.
Yeah, it's a sleight of hand. And then they basically force this down your throat by, just like in the previous piece, the way they were trying to force it down the parent's throat that the kids should not take standardized tests is it's the only one acceptable truth, and anything else makes you a bigot.
Yes.
And so, yeah, so look at this. Santa Monica High School students organize and carry out a, quote, systemized campaign for social justice that can take the form of a protest, a leaflet, a workshop, a play, or research project. They demonstrate their mastery of the subject matter by teaching about social justice to middle schoolers.
And by the way, Keri, as someone who used to live in Southern California, would you like to tell the audience who's not familiar with Santa Monica what the demographics of the Santa Monica High School probably are?
I taught there. I taught SAT prep there. It's a lot of rich white children.
There you go. There you go.
So once again, this is the elite, right? But it's moving beyond that, and this article shows that. So then they talk about at this school in Lawndale that students are assigned to write a, quote, breakup letter with a form of oppression, end quote, such as toxic masculinity, heteronormativity, Eurocentric, goodbye, I'm breaking up with you, the idea that heterosexuality is the norm. Well, I'm sorry, but it's factual that it is the norm.
What do they mean? Like, do they mean like a breakup letter in like romance? Breakup?
Yeah. You know what this made me think of?
How do you reference the Dakota Access Pipeline when breaking up with your girlfriend?
No, I'm not sure about that one, but I know what they mean. So when I quit smoking, my hypnotherapist who helped me quit had me write a breakup letter to cigarettes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So these kids are having to go home and write homework. Like imagine a male student comes back with a paper that's like, goodbye, toxic masculinity.
I see.
Served me well. And these are all the things I like about you and all the unfair advantages I've had, but I'm going to have to break up with you because you're toxic and blah, you know.
Okay. So they're breaking up with like concepts.
Yes.
Which is interesting because, wow, that's a really interesting form of indoctrination, because breaking up with a concept implies that you never need to consider it again. It's not something to ever be reconsidered.
No. Well, I guess I see what you mean, but what they mean is they're not going to, it's like breaking up with your privilege. You're not saying
what
it
I mean by
exist.
that is like, once you've broken up with the thing, you don't get back together with your broken up thing at that point.
Oh, I see.
It's an other now. And you've written that, like, I'm against that. That thing is not part of me anymore. And so you're
Right.
making your identity as like, I no longer am bought into this thing. It's it's
another version of them.
attestation.
Yes. It's another version of them seeking absolution for their sins.
Yes. And it's an attestation, which has, when you do an attestation, you're linking that thing to your identity, right?
Mm.
So they're now like linking it a little bit more to their identity than they would if they were just, teaching, hey, this is the concept of toxic masculinity, blah, blah, blah. Saying write a letter, breaking up with toxic masculinity is now making that part of your identity, not just some knowledge you've learned.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to skip on down to something. So they start talking about places outside of California and the ethnic studies movement, which has been underway for years. California is now looking at expanding this approach in a proposed statewide curriculum. They want to make ethnic studies a high school graduation requirement. So indoctrination is a requirement to graduate high school. They talk about how 2 years ago, the Indiana legislature mandated that high schools offer ethnic studies elective. They move on to talk about Texas and a few other places. But here's one thing I wanted to highlight to you. I don't know if you noticed this or not. Is sometimes they say the truth. You were like, I like it when people tell you who they are.
Often they do by mistake. They just tell you who they are.
Yeah. Yes. So up here, this person who opposes this says, this is indoctrination rather than education. You're totally right. It comes dangerously close to turning American exceptionalism on its head. Yes, we're exceptional, exceptionally evil. It is we're mindful of re-education camps in Vietnam or China. It is indoctrination rather than education. So what comes next?
That's perfect, by the way. Perfect analysis.
Perfect analysis. That is exactly what it is. So then look at this. Advocates say that the field of ethnic studies has a special mission distinct from other academic subjects. You don't say it has a special mission, almost like it's quote, I oftentimes think of ethnic studies as radical social action, said Julia Jordan Zachary, a professor and chair of the Department of Africana Studies at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and president of the Association for Ethnic Studies. Quote,
that's something that all three of us can agree on, Keri. We also often think of it as radical social action.
As radical social action. And look at her very next sentence, quote, it is education and knowledge that's produced to influence social change, she said, which makes it different in part from other types of disciplines whose primary concerns are, quote unquote, to simply produce knowledge, end quote. So the one thing she gets wrong here is it's not education. It is indoctrination. But she's right that the whole intent of it is to influence social change, and that it's very different from disciplines whose goal it is to impart knowledge.
Right. And again, this is, I'll go back to what I said before. This is related to making part of the responsibility, or abdicating responsibility as a parent for morally educating and shaping your child's worldview yourself, rather than just giving it to the school, abdicating the responsibility for doing that and just giving it to someone else. Because it's going to be people like that lady who
teach your child that this is a moral, here's a moral system. Let me hand you this and you can feel like a good person.
Right. You should be opposing to the North Dakota pipeline. You should be opposing toxic masculinity. You should be a good little NPC doing these things. That's how to be a good person. And I don't think schools did that in the past.
No, they didn't. This is new, and it's alarming, and it's spreading. So this goes on to talk about how expanding to the K-12 level, oh my gosh, how it is meeting with some resistance, but it's not just California. Arizona, Texas, here we go. Oregon and Vermont are next in the queue, both developing statewide ethnic studies standards. Oregon's proposed standards, which have not received final approval, would introduce first graders to such concepts as racism, gender identity, and systems of power. First graders. And first graders.
This is what happens when you concede the humanities to crazy Marxists, people. I mean, this is what happens. Years later, they control your kids.
Yeah.
Damn.
There is no single approach to teaching ethnic studies, and teachers are encouraged to adapt the materials to the needs of their communities. A common feature of the classes is discussing how oppression, now again, they're doing this with first graders and even kindergartners, how oppression and privilege shape one's group identity, whether white or black, straight or gay, male or female, binary or non-binary, among the identity categories commonly recognized in the discipline. This is really funny here.
By the way, wait, hold on. You know what I
Okay.
love about kids, like young kids? I remember this when my daughter was really young at the playground. Young kids are, I mean, unless you're teaching race at home, young kids are just colorblind by them. Like they don't care. It's not a feature that they care about. And I remember I was on the playground when my daughter was really young, and it was mostly whites and Asians on the playground because of where we live. And there was, I think, like maybe one or two African American. There was probably some Latino kids as well, but there was a couple African American kids. And I remember my daughter came up to me and she said, "Oh, I'm gonna go play ball with this one girl or whatever." And I said, "Oh, who?" Like, just point them out to me so I can, pay attention to where you are and what you're doing. And she was pointing and she was like, that one, the one in the purple jacket. And they all had like clothes that were weird colored or whatever. So like purple jacket was hard. Like I finally found the person with the purple jacket, and it was a African-American child. And it registered in my head that like most adults see that child as like, oh, this is the color of her skin and this is the color of everyone else's skin. And I'm going to point this person out by identifying the racial features of that person. But the kids are like, the identifying characteristic for her was her purple jacket. Her jacket was purple as opposed to everyone else's. And I thought to myself, like, that's the world I want. That's the world I want. I want the world where like, that's her identifying feature. It's like, oh, it's the purple jacket. We're not classifying people based on race. And that's not what we're doing anymore.
No, well, I agree that the kids have to be taught what race is or to focus on it as something that's really important. But I also don't think that that's necessarily the world we want as adults, because that requires ignoring, like a lot of SJWs pretend they will go out of their way. Like a white SJW, if there's been adults, a white SJW would have gone out of their way not to say the black guy in the purple
Oh, no,
jacket.
I don't mean that that's the world I want. I mean, I want the world where that's not your first thought, that like
right.
You look at people as individuals, not as members of categories. And like,
right. But if that's an easily identifiable characteristic, my whole point is SJWs will go out of their way when it's the easiest thing to refer to, because and the same thing with gender, because they don't want to assume gender. So they'll go out of their way to be like the purple jacket. Let's say they're all wearing purple jacket.
Right.
Well, the slightly darker purple jacket.
Yeah, that's not what I meant. But
right.
yeah,
I know, but
I get what you're saying. Right? And actually, Keri, they do it on, you'll notice, if you notice the news started doing it, they didn't want to, and actually even I think there was some issues where police were doing it where like they didn't want to say the suspect is black.
Yeah,
right?
They won't say the race of the suspect if the suspect is not white. That is starting to happen.
Right, which makes finding the suspect difficult. Because there are attributes. If I'm 7 feet tall and an albino, you should probably say that on the, like, it makes me easier to find. But if you're going to be like the guy in the purple jacket, like,
we should really do a sketch video of a police sketch artist who's trying to draw, and the witness keeps saying, well, and he was black, and he's like, wow, and what color were his eyes? Like, but you didn't make him black. Well,
I think, yeah, really we could also do a sketch where we could also just do a totally woke sketch where there's a crowd of people with like one black person who's wearing similar clothes to everyone else, and just someone trying to point them out without mentioning.
It's exactly what would happen. Yes. Those sketches would be hilarious. Oh, and by the way, same thing with gender. The witness, like, and it was a man. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Ooh, and then there's just like this amorphous sketch. A very non-offensive. Actually, you know, at the end of when you reveal the sketch, it should be just the NPC face.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's what it should be. Yeah.
Okay, we just wrote a sketch, guys. We need money so we can make it. Okay.
Yeah. I might cut that part out and save it for us for later, but yes.
Okay. I think you should leave it in. It's funny. No. Okay, one other thing I just want to say about this quickly, because I know we have to wrap this up. But here. So they're talking about how teachers are kind of winging this and what they're teaching, right? which makes for some weird, interesting things. So it talks about how in North Carolina, 10th graders were asked to do a diversity inventory. This is what you and I talked about already.
Yeah, it's the same school district actually that we talked about. Yeah.
And so one former school board member who was gay, expressed dismay on his own Facebook page that LGBTQ students were being asked to announce their sexual orientation and to out others in the community because they had to take stock of who everyone's identity in their family and then tell
my doctor's gay. What?
Right? Yeah. Exactly. So, and this is one I saw at the time, which I know I've mentioned at least once before in an episode, was this kid this was also in North Carolina. A mom complained because her 8-year-old son, so this is what, like 3rd grade, brought home a handout explaining white privilege, and she complained. Now, the knee-jerk reaction from SJWs would be, well, this white woman just doesn't want, her internal biases and her own racism doesn't want her kid learning about white privilege. No, the mom was Black and Hispanic. And she's like, my son was confused because the handout seemed to be saying that whites are superior. Yeah, that's what it is saying. People are not racist. We've talked about this before. The stuff that they're teaching kids, especially in the New York schools, which we started off this episode talking about the New York schools, since de Blasio has started instituting this very racist program of getting rid of standards so he can, which is punishing Asian kids, by the way, so that he can be happier with the percentages of Black and Latino students. He's hurting a lot of poor Asian kids of immigrants. And then so he's this guy that he appointed, this czar, what's his name?
Richard something, I forget, but
yeah, Carranza or whatever. We did a whole video on him. He what he's been teaching is all about white supremacy, all this ideology that we talked about. And as we did a video, Carter and I, if you guys haven't seen it, we should put the link here in the comments. But everything they're teaching, like white supremacists would be happy to teach your kids the same things. Yes. Right? Like they're teaching that, being on time and turning things in on time and being expected to meet standards are all symptoms of whiteness.
Right.
Success, right. Being successful. Like, what are you teaching kids? This is so racist.
It is so racist. By the way, it was the other article. It wasn't this one, but in that other article, that first one, Keri, there's an example. Can I just read?
Yeah.
A teacher in Saratoga Springs, New York, found a privilege reflection form online with an elaborate method of scoring and administered it to high school students. That's the setup. Here's the punchline. Unaware that the worksheet was evidently created by a right-wing internet troll, it awarded Jews 25 points of privilege and docked Muslims 50. I love that the internet trolls control high school teachers. It's awesome.
That's how laughable this is. Like we could make really horribly offensive materials and put it out there, and some of these teachers would be using it.
Yeah, like for $10, you could register a website that had some social justice-y name to it, make it look like you're some organization, and just start cranking this crap out, and teachers everywhere would use it. Yeah.
That's why some sites like everydayfeminism.com, people will look at that and doubt, is this a right-wing troll? No, it's real. Right. They really teach this stuff. Anyway. Okay, I know we have to wrap this up. And I appreciate you guys hanging with me during my emotions, especially Carter, who I yelled at, which hopefully is going to get cut out. And then I cried, which is going to get cut out.
Don't worry, I'll cut the crying out, definitely.
Thank you. I was really
I don't mind the yelling. I like when you get it animated, so I don't know how much of that I'll cut out, but I'll cut out the crying.
Well, I think I used the F word against you or something. I don't think we should leave that in.
Okay.
Maybe I didn't, but I was very forceful. I don't like it. That's why I cried. I felt bad. Anyway.
Well, we are in agreement on the craziness of this. And, I think it is, I think if I don't know how many people who call themselves liberals watch, but I'm sure there's some.
Yeah.
And if you call yourself a liberal, I think you should probably question a lot of the consequences of what's going on here in this social justice indoctrination. This is indoctrination of children. And It's not, you know, a lot of liberals, I remember in the past, liberals used to think of themselves as individualists. Individualists don't push for mass indoctrination of children for particular beliefs. That's not an individualist stance. And if you fancy yourself as an individualist, then this is all stuff to be pushed back on. And individualists make room for people to disagree. And they recognize that different families are going to instill different values in different kids, and that's fine. And it's none of your business. So.
And just this week, just anecdotally, just this past week, I've heard from 2 different friends who are parents, one in New York and one in Oregon, who are going to their kids' school board and are pushing back. And because they're looking at the materials, they're looking at the stuff their kids are being indoctrinated in, and they're saying, hey, this is not okay, and you better get ready for a lawsuit if you continue down this path.
Yep. Yeah. And we both know someone in California.
And we know someone in California doing the same thing. But just this week, I heard of 2 other, and I just thought, this is a thing. I think parents are starting to wake up that it's starting to touch them like it touched this guy.
I hope so. And, you know, the silver lining might be that this guy mentioned a few examples of things that were happening in the school in reaction, like kids were reacting in ways. One of them was they started handing out black kids, I guess, were selling or trading cards to white kids that would allow the white kid to say the N-word all day long while he carried the card. So like the kids are just making fun of it. And that's, you know, if that's the result, good. I think maybe when you've turned into the authority, the new punk, the new anti-authority thing is going to be pushback against the woke culture.
Well, hey, and that's industriousness, and that's free trade and free enterprise, right? The black kids are like, wait a minute, I have something you don't have. I have the ability to say the N-word. Well, I will sell it to you.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if the black kid, when he sells it, maybe doesn't use it all day. Is that the exchange? I'm not sure. I don't know,
but I love it. I love it.
It's funny. It's funny nonetheless. All right. Well, thank you, Keri, for coming back. Thank you for having a good discussion on this. And thanks everyone for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share. I don't know what else are we not telling them, Keri? Anything else?
No. We'll see you guys tomorrow, and we're going to be voting. Everybody, thank you who submitted suggestions for the next book club selection. If you guys want to get in on that, we have a Facebook page called Unsafe Space Book Club, and you can ask to join. And people are currently recommending books. We're going to compile like the top few of those into a poll, and we will vote on it.